And it is 5 p.m. We're going to start. First item to go over is approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you. Next item is approval of the minutes from May 26, 2022. Very nice job getting all of those motions correctly worded and understanding the intent of planning commissioners during some of those. So thank you very much, Kate. Does anybody have any comments on the minutes before we move to approve?
Kate made one adjustment on the city council report. It wasn't based on content, just punctuation.
Okay. Okay, great. So as long as she has that and that will be on the record, that's great. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Any second?
Second.
Second from Nick. Any further comment?
I'm going to be abstaining from next because I wasn't at the meeting at all. And
Okay. No problem. Pat is abstaining. Anyone else? All in favor?
And so it's to the minutes as amended, right? They said already, yeah.
Okay, sorry, yeah. Do we have a quorum? Do we have enough?
I need to check.
Matt is walking.
Matt's walking in. All right, we're gonna delay for 1 second.
I believe you also have in your bylaws where it says majority of those present and voting.
I think that was, yeah.
Okay,
That's
You would have been fine either way, but it's nice to have.
Gotcha.
that here
Matt.
for-
Matt, we are mid-process. We are about to approve the minutes from May 26, 2022. We're gonna give you a second to collect yourself, and you are welcome to join us in on that vote. Yeah.
I think they're excellent, so I have no.
Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Next item number 4, citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda. Do we have any citizens that would like to speak? No? All right, thank you. So moving right along to the item 5, new business. Item A, ZOA 2021-04, annual zoning ordinance amendments, plan unit development. We're going to continue the discussion of the PUD text amendment. Arnie, give us a little context. I think we discussed, maybe we haven't finalized of how long we want to discuss this, but this is the only item for business. Do we want to go for an hour? Do we want to go for?
No, sounds good.
An hour will do it.
Okay. Yeah,
We'll try to hit around 6 then, and then whatever follow-ups you have for city council report and the remaining items on the agenda.
yeah, that sounds
Sounds
good.
good.
Yep.
Okay.
Plan for that.
As you noticed in your minutes from the last meeting there, you did spend a little bit of time on PUDs, and there were a number of relatively minor corrections that were recommended. Those are included in your staff report today. So beginning on page 8, you'll notice some strike through and underline. We are now working from our original PUD and sort of have thrown out that Henrico version and are now refocused on our existing plan unit development regulations and modifications to that ordinance. And you have a number of decision points there listed at the top of page 8 that we would like to hit overall. And then getting into the text itself, there was a proposal from staff to strike the intent and purpose as written and provide a new intent and purpose section, and that was modified slightly at your last meeting. And then we also have a few other corrections or clarifications, modifications in the character of development section. One thing that I would like to pick up there, or maybe make 2 points, and then from then on, we can just sort of go through the language that we have line by line or as you like. In the character of development, which is 5.2, down in subsection J, there were a number of things added there, and it may not read or doesn't read terribly well. So maybe we need to break that up. Don't necessarily have to do the wordsmithing tonight, but just to point out that we had environmentally sensitive design as a character of development for PUDs. And then we also talked generally about adding efficiency of buildings, about stormwater measures that may be of the low impact type, and then also encouraging accessibility to parks and open spaces. And we only had a few minutes at the end of the last meeting, so that was just sort of thrown out there without a whole lot of meat or detail on that particular. So we may need to go back and figure out how to wordsmith that a little bit better. And it's up to you if you want to work on that now. And if not, I'm going to go on to the next item.
You might just add like such as or e.g., just make it flow a little bit better. But I think the content is good.
Okay. So environmentally sensitive design such as, and then have
Yeah,
those three
right.
things. Okay.
Yeah, I think so too. 'Cause I think they do fall under, those additional things do fall under environmentally sensitive design, so they don't need to be a different, right? So yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
All righty. And then the next one, we were also asked to check the reference in that paragraph after K. So an application is not necessarily required to possess every characteristic of the Plan Unit Development District as delineated in 5.1. And I believe the question came because 5.2 actually has character of development. So should that reference have been 5.1 or 5.2? It turns out 5.1 was the original reference. So it is 5.1, but the difficulty we now have with 5.1 is we've struck so much of the language, we really don't have that many characteristics in it.
Since I was a few minutes late to the meeting, could I be a few minutes late to comment on item J?
Sure.
I like the I'm wondering if we shouldn't have an EG in there instead of just a comma, for example, so that we don't. Because that's what we're doing. We're laying out some examples here.
Right, yeah, so you just,
The
Yeah.
comma, and it's an EG, a yada, you're.
right, that's we agreed on, yeah.
Oh, did you say EG or did you
Or
say
something
just
such
comma?
as,
Okay,
such as,
so, okay.
So just some indicator that these are examples.
Okay, yeah, okay, I thought that was just a comma, but as long as that's clear.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah.
I was like, yours is second to the motion. You want to vote on that now? So getting back to the reference to 5.1, that is actually the correct reference when this was adopted. But it doesn't perhaps make a whole lot of sense because there's so much in 5.1 that has been deleted. So do you want to make that reference actually to 5.2, and that green language that's suggested there may accomplish that?
Yeah, I thought that read well. Made sense.
Agree?
Yeah.
Right. And then now we're just back into the regular language that we have. Mind you, in the last discussion, we did make a couple other points that we'll get to, but we really need to sort of wade through the language that we have in front of us. So the next one is 5.3, the permitted uses generally. And it talks about in the plan unit development, all uses permitted by right in residential, commercial, and industrial districts may be permitted. That's quite a wide range of uses that are possibly allowed in a PUD. And then it goes on to say additional uses specifically enumerated in the final master plan may be permitted by right at the discretion of city council. Specific uses may also be excluded. So that means if you have a PUD and it lists a number of uses and they're all permitted, then they get to, and it's approved that way, then those are the uses that are allowed in that PUD. And it can also, as in a zoning up or a rezoning of a property, you also have the right to say, these are the ones that are allowed and this one, or these are the ones that are not allowed specifically. So that's what is provided to you in 5.3.
I was a little confused on this, looking back at it, because it says all uses permitted by right in residential, commercial, and industrial may be, so may be permitted.
So it's
Okay,
proposed by someone and then
Okay.
City reviews it, planning
Okay.
commission, council reviews it, and then says whether it is or isn't as
Okay.
part of the final
Right.
approval.
So this is basically saying any use at all is possible.
It
And
says-
city council will exercise their discretion.
That's what it says. It
Yeah, that
says
might be problematic, right? I don't-
permitted uses, but
Well, because, but someone else, okay,
we're going to conditional uses
Yeah.
next, but I just want to make
right.
clear that we're talking about
Okay.
permitted uses at this point. But yes,
Right.
it is a wide range of
Right.
permitted uses.
And so does this bear upon the question when we just want to talk about whether we're looking at an overlay district versus keeping the base zoning or that sort of like,
Yeah.
as you know, and having the whole thing being by right or as conditional, does that bear upon that?
That's a good point in that we've sort of gone back and forth. Do we want an overlay? Do we want a base district? And this was written as a base. So previous to the 2017, it was an overlay. And then in the 2017 update, when we adopted this language, it's a base district. It's not an overlay. But yes, you have to keep sort of in mind. And once we pick, then we have to make sure we go back and proofread and make it work for either the overlay or the base district.
It's sort of daunting, except that if you keep in mind that this is specifically for mixed use anyway. So I'm not sure, and it'll be mostly in the C2. So I'm not sure in that case it really causes any problems because it's allowing residential uses which aren't allowed, but any of the other commercial and industrial are already allowed. Is that right?
Mhm. Maybe I should go back a half step and explain. So far, what we've focused on is the C2 zoning districts that are part of the opportunity area. And there's one other opportunity area that's out on the eastern part of town, East Lexington Bluffs is the special planning area that I keep wanting to call, because that was the name of that study. So we do have to be a little bit cognizant. Are we talking about that one as well, or just the two C2 areas in town? And the two C2 zoning districts in town are out South Main Street, once we get to the co-op and all that out there, and out East Nelson Street when we get to the Kroger all the way out to the Sheets. So for the most part, we have been focusing on those two commercial zoning districts. And the benefit that we have, in my opinion, is most of those areas are already built out. We know what's around them. So if we have a parcel that comes in for any one of those for redevelopment, we already know what the context is around. And then I think we can fairly easily say whatever the proposed uses are, even though they may be wide ranging in possibility, that we can pretty well tell which ones would or would not be compatible with those existing uses immediately adjacent to that property.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, did that answer your
It did,
question
yeah,
about-
right, which I feel that that paragraph is not really a problem then in that
Yeah.
case.
All right. That makes sense to me.
We're not making any final decisions.
Right, no,
at
no,
all,
no,
so
no,
We're just
absolutely.
overview, and then
Yeah,
we have plenty of time
yeah.
to come back
just want-
and review and
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood
So are you
course.
giving us perspective as you go through this? What is going to be useful for you in terms of language? So, I mean, excellent questions and you responded to that, but would it be good for you to have more as the planning commissioner trying to have a bit more direction, or is this fine?
please provide the direction where you see fit, because we're just going through the language. In this case, we had a sort of a explanation, and there wasn't a need so far to make a change to that particular, but when there is a need to, we'll work that in and then bring it back to you at the next meeting for further evaluation. Yeah, please do chime in when you have questions or if you have suggestions for amended language.
Did we intentionally skip over 5.1, the intent and purpose? Is that,
Only because we sort of covered that in
Yeah.
our 15 minutes at the last meeting, but if you have questions there, please.
I guess, yeah, just clarifying, are we using, just to be consistent, are we using the PDMU?
Nah,
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
that is a name attached to it at this point in time. It does not need to be exactly that.
Okay, I just was, 'cause everything else is PUD, but then this is the only section that it's referred to. It seems to me like it's referred to that. I was just, I've missed that last meeting where we were.
Oh, apologies. We were borrowing sort of back and forth between the Henrico and the existing, and Henrico had the PD mixed use because they were trying to affect mixed use, and that's what we're trying to do also, at least that's my understanding at this point. So we can certainly call it PUD general, not general, just PUD. But I suspect that we may in the future may need a different type of PUD. So if we call this one PD mixed use and then later on determine if it's an overlay or a underlying zone district, then that may leave us open to a planned development residential if we find the need for one, as an example. So right now, this is a placeholder. We can certainly call it whatever you see fit.
But I do think it should have mixed use in it somewhere where,
Yeah, but I think we should be consistent with,
right.
say, talk about planning unit development and then make reference to in mixed use area, there are mixed use applications. You can maybe make reference to it, but I think PUD, making sure it's consistent throughout as opposed to putting other acronyms in there as,
Like PUD dash MU, is that what?
I think let's just do PUD right now, and then later as Arnie sees necessary, then we add in the MU.
Yeah, and the only reason I make the distinction is because as I'm reading through this now, I'm just thinking about mixed use. And then later we can look at residential and see if it's the same or if it does need to be a whole different ordinance.
I would prefer if we could get through this, whatever this is, and so far it's mixed use.
Yeah.
And then in the future, if we have to add another PUD, then maybe we pull back some general PUD language and then have the distinction between mixed use and whatever that new PUD thing is.
So what you're saying is then to, instead of Article 5, planned unit development, what you'll say is planned unit develop mixed use or / mixed use, and then use the acronym PUD/MU, just because that's what's then discussed just to be consistent throughout.
Yeah, good point. If
Yeah.
we're okay with that,
Yeah.
in Article 5, it'll be planned development hyphen mixed use.
Yeah, and also in section 5.5, it's literally says mixture of uses is one of the, that's the headline for section 5.5. So it's, we're getting there. Yeah.
Okay. And again, these are all sort of placeholders. If we get further into it and you see a need to go back, we can certainly do that. Are we all good with 5.3 permitted uses generally?
Yes.
So we'll move on next page, 5.4. Permitted uses with conditional use permit. One or more uses permitted by conditional use permit in any zoning districts may be permitted in the plan unit development if documented in the master plan. This is similar to what you've seen in the campus master plan. If it's a conditional use and it happens to be included in the submittal that you get, and the distinction with PUDs is you get a narrative and you get a plan. So if it's showing a use that may be, say, a conditional use in a commercial zoning district, I think a parking garage might be a good example. A parking deck or a parking facility is a CUP, a conditional use permit. But if it's shown in this plan unit, this plan development mixed use document, both in writing and on the plan itself, then they get to do that. So basically what you show is what you get. And then the next sentence, any use desired but not documented in the approved master plan requires an application to amend the master plan. You may recollect that also from the institutional overlay, that if it's something that you want to do after the fact, then you've got to go back through and do an amendment. And that amendment is through the public hearing process. Any heartburn for the conditional use permit section? So you're basically, it's very similar to what's the previous section about permitted uses. It's what you show is what you get. And if you need to do something else, then you've got to go back through the public hearing process to do an amendment.
Should we specify that in there?
That second one, it's in there. So in conditional use, it's in. And then I'm sure it'll be covered
So we're
also
talking
in the
about-
application section.
Yeah, okay. It's okay.
But don't let me forget that. We've got to make sure that it's there. I'm pretty sure it's there, but
Okay.
once we get to it,
I just
that
didn't
any-
know if we wanted to specify it in that section, but that's fine. I mean,
as long as it's included in the other one, we can certainly do that here, but just we'll placeholder and make
Sure.
sure that it's there when we get there. I think it's there. Anything else for 5.4?
Is this basically getting at Pat's question? Yeah, is does this PUD is it controlled by the underlying zoning or isn't that what you were asking?
Yeah, I was wondering what the, you know, when we come to that question, what bearing will these questions have on it? So.
But
I
isn't
think
that
we're
the
just keeping
question?
that in mind for now, right?
But
That's
let's
going on
go
right
through
here.
that.
Yeah.
If this is an overlay district, which is
Mhm.
not written that way now, let's just say it's an overlay district. And we're talking about the C2 zoning district. So we would look at the conditional uses allowed in the C2 zoning district. So what's allowed currently by a conditional use permit. And then if we pull one of those forward for the plan, then it's approved that way, then they get to do it. And then otherwise, they have to go back through an application to amend it by doing a separate conditional use permit. And then it's really not, in my opinion, not a whole heck of a lot of difference as far as where you're pulling the uses from, conditional or by right, and then how you sort of put those into the master plan and how they are approved in the master plan. So right now, I'm not sure that we'd have to do much of a change at all for overlay or base zoning district.
Right.
But once we figure that out, we do have to go back and read carefully through to make sure that whichever one we choose, the ordinance is in line with that.
And that's what's at issue with 5.4, right? Is that our? Well, maybe not. Okay, let's go ahead.
But this is written as a district as it is now. But won't you lose for C2 in general? If you make it a overlay, can you add housing then?
That's a good point, because in C2, I can't remember if
We don't allow housing.
multifamily, that's right, it's not.
And that's because
Ah,
that's the
yeah.
benefit of making a district is
Yep,
you're
there you
given
go.
more flexibility. Which again is why maybe we'll end up having a separate PUD for mixed use versus residential. Because
Because just to support that, in your multifamily zoning districts, in C2, it says nothing. So it's not by right, it's not conditional. So it would actually have to be changed, or as you're saying, that's the perfect reason or the reason to make this a base district and not an overlay without having to do more work to allow the multifamily in, or at least allow that mixed use component to
Mhm.
include multifamily. Anything else for 5.4? In 5.5, mixture of uses, it says a variety of housing types and non-residential uses are strongly encouraged. The mixture of uses shall be based upon the uses recommended in the comprehensive plan. In the comprehensive plan, it's so sort of generic and not specific. So I don't know if we would necessarily rely on the comprehensive plan saying for a parcel in the C2 zoning district out East Nelson Street, that it should have 3-unit or 3-bedroom apartments in it as an example. So it's just, we have to just take that into account that that's not going to be terribly specific what the comp plan is designated per parcel.
And it might help actually with like the East Lexington Bluffs, because we did have some language in there as far as preserving the natural habitat and things like that. So, but you're right. Otherwise, we don't have a whole lot.
Might it be more that we want to say, instead of based upon the uses recommended, based upon the goals and strategies of the comprehensive plan? In other words, what do we want to accomplish for this district based on what our goals are? Is that kind of the idea?
I think that's good. Maybe have uses, goals and strategies, all.
Now, the way it's worded, it says the housing types and non-residential are strongly encouraged, which could leave it open for someone to say, could they say, well, could I do this without any residential? And then we pretty much want in this residential and non-residential. That seems to be our goal in this right now, right? So does that leave it open, or does it say, is it required that there's in other words, does this have to be residential and non-residential? Or not? Is it,
I don't think it has to be, but
Okay.
right, it's strongly encouraged, but
Okay.
right, doesn't have to be.
in which case, in other words, then we don't need two, we wouldn't need two different PUD types then, because you could say, well, I just want to do residential. I don't want to do non-residential. You're strongly encouraging me, but I just want to do residential. Can I do that?
Yeah, I think the only time you would need a residential PUD is for in residential areas.
Right,
You wouldn't want to
Right.
allow the commercial. We don't want to encourage mixed use
Right.
at this point in
right,
residential.
right. But what if and it's okay if they want to leave out housing, that someone says, I just want to do this with just commercial uses.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's mixed use with just commercial uses, aren't, I would assume.
And I'm maybe misremembering, but I think in the Henrico, it said you had to have 30% residential, or I believe there was some minimum amount of residential that you needed. So I guess that's the question for you. Do you want each PUD mixed use to have a residential component to it that you can say at least a minimum amount of?
Because otherwise, how would it differentiate it from what you can already do in the commercial district? Like what would be the
Right.
creative things that they might want to do that they can't quite do with the zoning as it is now, rather than adding in the residential, which, as you said, is not allowed as it is. So,
Could you do like shared parking over multiple parcels or something like
I
that?
think we'll get into the shared parking, because it's trying to encourage shared parking and
Right.
other things. I think that's further back in here, but
My,
for the
my,
most part, we have that sort of commercial idea on the first floor, then residential above. And I'm
Mhm.
struggling to think of anything else, such as,
Mhm.
would you have a restaurant on the first floor and something other type of retail, commercial, something else? And is that sufficient for what we're trying to accomplish? Or do we actually want on each one of these a residential component?
I feel like our comprehensive plan kind of, and just the push of problems with housing in this area, that we have to, part of the creativity is going to require some kind of housing. I think I would be I agree with Pat that this could be taken a couple of different ways in the way it's strongly encouraged, as opposed to saying you must have 30% residential or something, that, because I think we really do have to. Yeah, I'm a big fan in requiring there to be housing in it.
I agree. Is 30% pretty standard? You said the Henrico one was,
think I'm remembering that correctly, but don't hold me to it.
yeah, I mean, maybe just if we see some like some examples of if there are requirements for residential in different like similarly sized areas, what their requirements would be, you know?
Do we, if the intent is to have residential of some amount, do we want to put necessarily a minimum? Because we have square footage in commercial and we have dwelling units in residential. So how are we going to necessarily combine those? So I'm wondering if we just say some residential component must be, and then hope like heck it's not just like one little studio apartment.
Mhm.
Or do we say a residential component is required and leave it blank for now and then figure out once we have one, because we are just simply not going to know all the answers. And if we have somebody that comes in and say, hey, I've got this great idea for this property, but I don't want to do residential because it's for some reason. And then do we then go back and do a quick modification to accomplish that? So I guess my point there is simply, we're not going to have all the answers up front for this. So you may want to just settle on something for now so that you can move on, but also know that there are opportunities later when somebody comes in with something different to potentially modify this ordinance if it's the thing that you really want and we haven't simply considered it.
so I wasn't, I'm sorry.
No.
I wasn't raising this to necessarily say we got to make that definite. If it seems like there might be, as you say, purely non-residential uses that need this PUD to accomplish what it wants because you can't do it now, then I'd be fine, like you said, leaving it as it is with the assumption that I mean, this is what we're looking for, this is what we're pushing for, but as you said, if someone comes in and says, well, I want to do something really creative that I can't do with the regular C2, and that's fine with me. I'm not pushing necessarily to make it a requirement. I just want to see what folks thought.
So is this strongly encouraged for the residential component enough for everyone else for now?
Mhm.
Okay, that's good with me.
Yeah.
If,
Yeah, I really think that there's a real housing issue. And if someone is going to be creative with a PUD, I feel like requiring there to be some incentive or just some push, some requirement, they have to be thinking in terms of addressing not just economic needs, but residential needs in our community is, I don't know. That's our comprehensive plan. That's why I'm pushing this so hard, because in our comprehensive plan, and also it's been an issue that we've talked about lately, right? In many hours of discussions with consultants from the outside about affordable housing, not that this mixed use would be affordable housing, but having something there that is consistent, a requirement. I just feel.
How about just for discussion or consideration, how about that first sentence is changed and it says a variety of housing types and non-residential uses are strongly encouraged. If residential is not provided, the applicant must provide due justification for not including residential uses. So then it puts it on further onto the applicant to explain why they would not be in a particular case. Is that enough, or you still would prefer to have a minimum requirement, absolute requirement?
Not requiring anything. I'm thinking about this and
Can I just ask a question of Planning Commissioner Arnie, is what is maybe Pat was alluding to, what are mixed uses that don't include residential in it? Like what are two different commercial or industrial uses that we could foresee that wouldn't involve housing that isn't already allowed in commercial? Is it like retail and restaurant? But those are both allowed in C2. Is that
It
Yeah.
could be education
okay?
in one of those others, either retail or commercial.
Like-
But we don't allow education, I believe, in C2
Or
of
like
any type.
like manufacturing, like coffee roasting, or is that or brewery, like a brewery? Is that like a agricultural thing? I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out what mixed uses.
We have so much that's already allowed in C2, except for residential. So it's hard for me because I'm always thinking about the living space above the commercial space,
Mhm.
and so I'm not having a good example in my head of when we could have a mixed use commercials and or industrial to provide to you. So I just don't have one.
I guess what I'm getting at is if there really aren't too many examples, like then by definition are mixed use sort of by default requires it has to be something residential if we
and we are saying, and we also said maybe we're going to change the mixture of uses shall be based upon the whatever the goals or objectives of the comprehensive plan. And that would be the place to say, look, we want, more housing and more different kinds of housing. And that would be the place where we could enforce that so. I guess we'll have to wait to hear what Jamie and John would think too the next time if we're ever all together.
So we'll just ponder that a little bit more and maybe come back to it and consider whether or not we want to have, and if we do, then we can provide maybe some sort of minimum requirement.
Yeah, I think, it might be helpful to know, like, again, like what, if we can find any other like similarly sized areas, like what type of, if they have requirements, what type of, like what percentage they would have. So we have an idea of what would be a reasonable requirement if we did put one in there.
Moving on, if we're okay, then to 5.6 minimum area for plan unit development currently says 3 acre minimum. And we had a little bit of discussion, or it was mentioned at least briefly during the last meeting. Is there any heartburn with, and we talked about it actually previous to that as well. Is there any heartburn over the 3, or is there any reason to go to something perhaps less? And we've provided, one of your supporting documents in the back shows you a number of parcels in those 2 areas that we're concentrating on and the acreages for each. Now you can aggregate a couple parcels. So just because the parcel doesn't meet 3 acres currently, if you added a couple together, you could reach 3.
I think we should go with less than 3 acres just to provide more flexibility. That's,
With that in mind, could a PUD be, for example, in the C2 district, could it be something crazy as a gas station with a restaurant in it? Is that a PUD application or is that something different? I mean, what are we trying to allow in that area?
Yeah, it gets back to what we were just talking about as far as those 2 things. You basically have that in sheets right now, so it's already allowed.
I
Yeah.
mean, is the design standards different in a PUD, which would allow developers to sort of build up instead of having to have a certain, is that sort of one thing that a potential reason why they would be incentivized to use a PUD is just that they can get around, they can build higher than normal.
We never encourage anybody to get around anything, but yes, it does incentivize you. And you'll see in the parking calculations as an example, parking is always one of the limiting factors. Do I have enough area for parking for whatever use I'm proposing? And then you'll see later on when we get to parking, it says you basically provide your own parking calculation, justify it, and if it's acceptable, and because you're trying to share parking spaces, you're trying to create less pervious area and all those things. So, and then also with the height that you mentioned, yes, if we do what I think we should, as far as maybe decreasing some height that's allowed now in C2 and then incentivize this so we get what we want out of it. In other words, if we really want a minimum amount of residential or this mixed use component, whatever it ends up being, then yes, they have the ability to go higher if they provide that mixed use that we're trying to accomplish through the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, I could see parking being a good reason for a couple different businesses to gather around and try to make a better plan by having shared parking. We talked about allowing anything in here in C2 in these areas. And again, I don't think education is allowed in C2 right now, but it's allowed in residential. In churches, is that another one? I'd be sort of nervous now opening up our commercial area or these opportunity areas to either of those uses. So something to think about. Maybe we should all go back and look at those tables for next discussion.
Just quickly, educational facility, college, university is a conditional use permit in C2.
Okay.
Educational facility, primary, secondary is not conditional or by right, so it's a prohibited use.
Okay.
So, but the college, university thing is a conditional use permit in C2, and our religious assembly is a conditional use permit in C2.
Oh, okay. Then I guess it doesn't. No problem.
But those could also be amended.
for the area requirement, is there any reason it's 3 specifically versus 2 or 5 or 4? Is there any, is it just?
It used to be
If you're
5.
asking me to justify it, I can't. But we had 5, and then we had somebody come in with a project that was in the 3 acre range, and they asked for it to be adjusted down to 3, and then they ended up not using the PUD and ended up using their existing zoning for multifamily. So we did do an adjustment that wasn't utilized.
I think we ended up thinking 5 was too much, that there weren't any really there weren't enough. And I think the thinking was if we go too small, what are you gonna be able to put there anyway? I mean, how much can you get in 2 acres of a mixed use thing. I think that was our thinking, right? We tried to go down to accommodate the general's retreat, and they're like, yeah, forget it. We're good.
The reason, the main, I'm just looking at these maps. The only reason the main reason I'm suggesting 2 is because it looks like there'd be a lot more flexibility if any of these areas were subdivided, because or any of these parcels were combined. Because it just looks like there's a lot more, like between 2 and 3, it looks like there's a lot more places things could be put. It's just the reason why I'm suggesting 2 over 3.
If you get too small, like Arnie had brought it before, the university cleaners, make it 2 stories, have housing above. Well, that makes sense. I mean, another alternative, if you want to encourage that kind of thing, is just for us to allow housing in C2, but only on the second, not on the ground floor. And I just go back to Henrico had, I think it was a 16-acre minimum for mixed use. I hate to get too small, then we're just
Yeah.
allowing,
Specific,
yeah.
individual
right,
specific
And-
uses that could just be done through an amendment. right?
Exactly.
I don't think there's a comfortable magical
No.
number.
Yeah.
It's just sort of a little bit gut feeling. So are we okay with the first sentence that says 3-acre minimum for now?
I am.
Moving on to that second sentence there, additional area may be added to an established PUD if it adjoins and forms a logical addition to the approved development. The procedure for the addition of the PUD district shall be the same as the original if the application was filed, and all requirements shall apply except the minimum lot area. So clearly, if you have one, let's say it's 2 acres now, but it happened because we have some PUDs that are smaller than 5 and smaller than 3. Not in the commercial that I'm aware of, but if you wanted to add on to that one, you just have to go through the same process. But you don't have to be your own 3-acre size. You could be less than that as long as you're adding on to an existing PUD. Okay.
Yeah.
Open space, we've delved into open space a little bit before, since we have such small parcels, and at least in the 2 areas that we're talking about, I'm not sure that we have any natural features that we really need to preserve. So the recommendation previously was to delete A, B, and C. And if there are any questions there, I'll go on to D.
Mhm.
Open space shall be dedicated in a logical relationship to the site and in accordance with any guidance from the comprehensive plan regarding significant open space. And again, significant, what does that mean? Are we going to have significant open space? I do think that you want to have some open area that's shared space for people. If it's public or private, we'll get into that. But if you're in an apartment building on top of a commercial, you're still going to want to have some sort of public shared space where people can congregate. I'm not sure that necessarily has to be a public park that's dedicated to the city, or any space that the city is necessarily taking care of, because we're pretty much in a really commercial urban sort of environment where true open space, at least the way I consider true open space, lots of trees, lots of grass, dogs running around. I'm not sure that we're going to have that on these small parcels in this commercial area. Okay. Item E, improvements shall be configured to accommodate permitted accessory and conditional uses in an orderly relationship with one another, with the greatest amount of open area and with the least disturbance to natural features. Again, I'm not sure how many natural features we're going to have if you consider any of our C2 zoning districts. And if you're going to, as an example, redo not the sheets, the shoals, it's already completely paved. I'm not sure what natural feature, but maybe we do include something in there that says congregating public space is encouraged or something to that nature. So we can potentially look for additional language if you'd like something else than what's provided here.
Yeah, I think for now it's fine. I mean, I like the least disturbance to natural features when I think about, again, the East Lexington Bluffs, if something were ever to be proposed for there. And then, thinking maybe like VDOT, it'd be nice to have some, whatever they come up with, if it does include housing, having some open area. Cause
That
it's a nice
5+
big,
acre parcel. Yeah, absolutely. That makes more sense there than some of the smaller parcels that we
Yeah.
have.
Should we throw in that open spaces promotes attractive and unique developments that are also environmentally conscious in keeping with the comprehensive plan? Making reference to, so if it's a little bit vague what's being approved, at least they have to be consistent with what we lay out in the comprehensive plan, which is a very vague document in the first place, is aspirational, but
Yeah, I think that's fine. Also, Arnie, what were you saying? You said you wanted to hold off on the discussion about public space versus private space. Can we say, can we say a little sentence that we strongly encourage use of shared public space and also maybe thinking about accessibility? I don't know. Is it, if this is the place to like try to throw in some of those other things we talked about in comprehensive plan?
It's up to you if you're okay with the way it is, or if you would like to. Because what we have here, I think in A, B, and C really didn't work. So how much do we want to tweak D and E to work with what we have, which again, in my opinion, is small lots, it's commercial, it's already developed. But we are trying to get at this development that's better than what you can do in the underlying zone district or the existing zone district. And how do we get to that? Would we prefer to have a statement in that encourages exactly what you just said, use of shared public space? So that indicates to a developer, hey, you can't just put up parking lots and buildings. You might want to think of something that
Little courtyard, little dog pen for your dogs, something like that.
So should we add that strongly encourage use of shared public space somehow into D or E?
Yeah, I see that it was sort of struck out of item A, but yeah,
I think that was more for the 30% requirement, but yeah, we could certainly. Any feelings one way or the other?
I don't have any strong feeling one way or the other. I'm kind of fine with how it is, but
if you do put it, I don't know that I'd put strongly encourage, maybe just encourage.
We'll work that in there some form or fashion for your next edition. Any other questions on open space?
no.
Densities.
Mm.
That wasn't me. The gross and net residential densities shall be shown on the approved final master plan by area and for the development as a whole in dwelling units per acre and shall be binding upon its approval. So basically what you show, and you have to say in that area, you're going to have this many dwelling units per acre. And if you have different types, then each area shall have a calculation. And the overall gross density so approved shall be determined by city council with reference to the comprehensive plan. And then we struck out the 20 dwelling units per acre maximum.
Yeah, and John had concerns about leaving it totally up to council, which I understand. And my guess is, and you probably know, the 20 dwelling units per acre, I mean, that matches up perfectly with Weatherburn. So I don't know if that's where we got that number or if it just worked out. The reason for striking it was for most of these are going to be multifamily, and we have existing apartments that's already closer to 30 units per acre. So if you don't want to leave it too lax, could we say 20 for, I don't know, single family and in duplexes, and 30 per acre for multifamily? Or there's somehow puts a little bit of limits in there, but not stricter than what we already have in our regular zoning.
That leads me to another question, and I'm not sure if I answer yours, but mentioned single family and other things. So far, I think we've been trying to focus on this layered approach of having commercial on the first floor and then residential above. So I thought we were mainly talking about multifamily developments, not necessarily having commercial space eaten up by single family detached or single family attached, if you want to consider townhouses single family attached. So where does that leave us as far as the number of dwelling units to the acre? If you're comfortable starting out with 30 and just saying 30 multifamily units,
And then that also gets, and we'll get to it later, building height. I mean, if you're gonna have a 60-foot building, which might be too high, but you probably get even more than 30 in.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. And that's where, I mean, we're kind of looking for that. I mean, we're kind of looking for height in a way, whatever we set it at, and that will allow for a lot of units if we're building up. And so,
I mean, I have some concerns about limiting the number of units without kind of, I mean, I almost think we should look at it, or it should be looked at on a case by case basis, look at the design and see if it looks like it's sufficient and there's enough square footage per apartment, or, I mean, I think it's hard to know an exact number that's a good amount of units per, you know what I mean?
then
And
if somebody comes in with single room occupancy or
studios.
thank you.
Yeah.
And it has a whole bunch of studios because all of a sudden that's what's needed 5 years from now for whatever reason. And that's a whole bunch of dwelling units per acre, but it's not a whole bunch of space. Then are we limiting ourselves?
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, that was gonna just say, so it does make sense as it reads right now, then I think
Yeah, I think
based on
it's-
that.
Did John express that I said I wasn't here, did he elaborate on why he was concerned with striking?
Because it left it up to city council.
Uh,
I mean, I'm not opposed to having some limits, but I just think it's hard to know, like, hard to just pick a nut, you know what I mean? Like, if we had like, I don't know, some idea of like, like when we looked at all the, like the different like buildings and such and like what the design, like if we had like maybe like a visual to know like what, I mean, I don't know. It's just, I just think it's hard to pick a number and say what we want to limit it to without seeing some project designs and,
Hank just had a great idea, and that's reaching out to Rachel Rowland. She spoke once or
Yeah.
twice
Yeah.
and is in the multifamily field. And she said, if it's a 3-story walk up versus, and she knew the numbers
Mhm.
Yeah.
immediately. If we
Yeah.
can find and use her as a reference, we'll
Yeah.
try to do that for this.
Because I think the 20 does seem kind of low for what we're trying to push towards.
Because I mean, I think at the end of the day, to get to facilitate affordable housing, we have to have more housing options, because if we have less housing options, they're going to be more expensive because of
Right.
supply and demand.
Okay, I'm okay leaving it as it is and then looking into the more specifics.
Going over to the next
When you say
page.
leaving it as it is
Yeah.
with,
With the
so
cross,
keeping the cross out.
keeping the cross
but
out,
just
yeah,
think- okay,
yeah. Yes,
And hopefully we'll get you more information
Yeah.
that'll be helpful.
Okay,
as
yeah,
far
I just
as-
wanted to make sure I understood.
Going over the next page, we have non-residential density. So your square foot for retail or office or whatever it ends up being should be expressed in terms of total square footage by area. And for the development as a whole, there's no maximum square footage for non-residential uses, but the proposed uses should be in proportion to the overall intent and functionality of the planned district concept. What that last part means, I don't really know. But it's nice language.
it's very nice language.
You can interpret that, I'm sure, a number of different ways.
Got it. Oh, understand it perfectly.
Any desire to change that or ask for additional information?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm kind of uncomfortable with that last, but that's just because
Well, you could
The
delete
co-
that, so it could be there is no maximum square footage for non-residential uses.
But I kind of like that last sentence,
Gives you a
because
little bit of something.
it does, right? If planning commission doesn't like what they're seeing, it looks like too much, at least you can refer to that and say, it doesn't meet this.
Gives you an out.
Right.
In other words, if there's just one use that is just too big and dominating the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
Or that you're like, we're not getting enough going on here. If we just have one non-residential use, that might be out of proportion to what we want. We want more going on, right? Is that the idea, I think?
Can you remember the planned unit concept? That's what we establish in the 5.1? Is that
I believe so,
that's so when we say PUD MU, whatever, that's the concept to which we're referring. Okay, okay.
That is the
yeah.
intent and purpose.
Maybe we could say plan unit as established in 5.1 or something like that. Just to give some direction.
Yeah, I mean, you're just saying we should just clean up what
Yeah,
plan
yeah,
district
yeah, yeah,
concept,
yeah.
just put in the term that we finally come upon there for what we're talking about.
The planned unit, the PUD as established, as noted in 5.1.
Yeah,
So make
right.
reference.
Yeah, to whatever we're
internally,
calling
yeah.
it, yes.
So it just refers back to the intent and purpose
Yeah.
section.
That's what I think.
Okay, we'll add that for the next go around. Next section is setback regulations. This gets a little bit complicated, maybe more towards the end, but within the plan unit development district, minimum setback ranges shall be specifically established during the review and approval of the concept plan. This is the one place where you're now asking the developer to provide a range of setbacks, not the actual setback. And let's pick a building use. If it's got commercial on the first floor and there are 2 apartments above, they're saying that it's okay for an applicant to come in and say, hey, my rear yard setback is going to be between 20 and 30 feet. And then as long as he actually comes in with the final site plan, it's within 20 to 30 feet, then it's acceptable administratively and through the site plan process, presumably. But if it's within 10 feet to 15 feet, the actual proposal, it doesn't meet the 20 to 30 that he's provided to you. So this is getting that conversation we've had before between master plans that are more conceptual versus what we were talking about, PUD plans that are much closer to site plans where you're getting actual. So this is a little bit, I'm not going to say unusual, but maybe unusual for us in that it's talking about a range of setback. Is there any heartburn there that they may not have the final when they present to you this PUD concept with a narrative and a plan? On the plan, it might say front yard setback between 5 and 15 feet from the front property line. Or do you actually want a minimum setback?
It feels a little squishy to me. It makes me nervous.
But C2 doesn't have setbacks, does it?
Okay, so okay.
In the C2 zoning district, it is a 30-foot front yard, 30-foot side yard when abutting a residential district.
Okay.
And when it's not, if you're C2 besides C2 on the sides, then you have 0. And it's the same thing for the rear yard, 30 feet when abutting a residential
Yeah.
district.
Well, regardless whether they say a specified setback or a range, as long as we're okay with the floor of that range, then the minimum, then
Mhm.
it's doing the same thing. Unless we really don't want like a maximum setback because we don't want to waste space. That's the only reason why. But as long as we set the low end of the range to what we're actually okay with.
And C also gives some definition, just some specificity as well.
Mhm.
Okay, going on to that second sentence, then specific setbacks may be approved administratively in the site plan process if they are in conformance with the established ranges, or a modification of the master plan will be required if the provided setbacks are not within the established ranges. The following guidelines shall be used in establishing building spacing and setbacks. A, areas between buildings used as service areas, storage, or trash or other utility purposes should be designed so as to be compatible with adjoining buildings. A little bit open for interpretation, perhaps. B, building spacing and design shall incorporate privacy for outdoor activity areas, patios, decks, etc., associated with the individual dwelling units whenever feasible. I think that's comfortable for people that are in a residential unit and want a little bit of privacy. C, yards located at the perimeter of the plan unit development district shall conform to the setback requirements of the adjoining district or to the setback requirements of the planned district, whichever is greater. So you are then looking at whatever is around you. And if the thing across the street is R1 and it has a 25-foot front yard setback, then what may be your rear yard setback has to match that.
Meaning that there's therefore 50 yards between your
Feet, yeah.
the extra feet.
Yeah.
That's what that means.
I'm not sure that I necessarily have a recommendation for any changes to that, but that is how we currently have it listed, unless you all have some recommendations.
I'm comfortable with what's there. And
We'll leave it as is. The last sentence, in no case shall setbacks interfere with public safety issues such as sight lines and utilities, including other public infrastructure such as sidewalks, open space, etc. We are now at the 6 o'clock and happy to stop with
we
the
don't get to talk
PUDs
about
if you're,
heights.
Yeah.
or if you want to go to height, we can cover height.
Let's talk about height. Let's talk about height.
Yeah.
It's in there.
Let's see. I wouldn't mind including that. I'm going to miss the next meeting and I have a little bit of angst on some of the heights. I'll be interested in hearing what y'all say.
We're going to go continue with height then. 5.10, height of buildings in the plan unit development district. The height regulation shall be A, single family residences is 45 feet. And we did provide you on one of our pages in the back, which is 20 or 19 and 20, the existing lot requirements, which have heights for the zoning districts in particular, just if you wanted to refer back. So single family residences would be 45 feet maximum. And again, you may want to consider whether or not you're going to allow single family residences. If that's something that's going to eat up too much land area and we don't have it for a single family residence in a commercial zoning district, that's another consideration. Banks, office buildings and hotels, 60 feet, and it says maximum. We tried to provide you with, during Nick references a little bit ago, sort of our number of photographs. I can't remember how many months ago that was, but just to starting out with 2-story buildings, and we went all the way up to maybe 20-story buildings. You generally can get a story in 10 feet. So that would be about a 60-foot or 6-story building, roughly. Depends on if you want a flat roof or if you want something that it's a little bit nicer with a peak roof, then you may actually lose a floor. So in 60 feet, you could probably comfortably do 5 floors, but the 6th floor may or may not be possible.
And that's what the 60 feet is the number I have an issue with. We don't allow 60 feet anywhere except downtown with only for government buildings.
With
Public
con-
and governmental buildings
with
with
the
a
conditional
seat.
use.
Yeah, right. And so we do have some that are close to that tall or taller at WNL and VMI, but they have setbacks. So it doesn't make it as intrusive. So I'm just thinking in Lexington,
What's the gin? Well,
yeah, that
your
one's,
story- that's
I think
8
7 stories. So that one is our tallest
Yeah,
building.
tallest non-institutional
Right,
government building.
Right. Do you want a building that close to that tall at other places in Lexington? I'm not sure I
Well-
do unless you have a big setback.
Well, we're allowing now the Washington and Lee buildings 50 and 54 feet, right?
Yeah, right.
7, yeah.
Right. So, and it's a question, is the question, we, like you were keep saying, we want to give them something that they can't have otherwise in this. And it's either make it higher than what the regulation is now or lower everything, lower the regulation that, lower the
Yeah.
regulations we have. And
Well, during the Spotswood discussion, there was a proposal for the 55-foot building that I thought people didn't like. It was too close to the hospital, worried about. I don't know if that's that. Both of these areas are close to the hospital where there's like helicopters taking off and all that stuff. So I don't know if that's something to be considered.
It's not even really a consideration for the Spotswood property, quite honestly.
Yeah. So, but I'm talking about that was an issue there, but so now that same idea of like having in the C2 zoning districts that are close to the hospital, whether you want tall buildings, I don't, but I'm not,
And we were told by the hospital, it's not an issue.
Not
They
an
can,
issue.
they can work their flight plan. It's not-
and never mind.
And I think the places we're looking at are not, I think that the problem with the initial Spotswood one of the 55 was that there's, houses nearby, that it was it wasn't in keeping with the area. But with the areas we're talking about, I mean, the VDOT property, for instance, that's not towering over someone's backyard. It's not
Right.
like that medical building on Houston Street that's looming over that little house next to it. Right. I mean, that's a problem, but I think where we're looking at, I think we're looking for taller, and if we're going to be allowing those Washington and Lee buildings being 50 and 54, then I'm not too worried about because currently it's 45 feet, right?
Right. So it's not a big difference, but yeah.
It's not, so I think if we want to give people something and say, you know what, I want to put restaurant commercial on the first floor and then have apartments up top,
Mhm.
they might want that.
And just to point this out, I mean, if we're staying with the 3 acres for the size, there's only so many places that we could put that where these planning unit developments can go. So there's only so many of them that can maybe be built. So having a larger height allows for potentially more living units to be put in these places. So if we limit both the height and have a more stringent acreage requirement for these, there's only so many extra living spaces we can put in or allow to be potentially created. So we have to kind of think about them, I think, in tandem.
You do bring up, it is a 3 acre minimum. So that does give me a little bit of ease, because in the review process, if it's too close to, say, Nelson Street, if they want to put a 60-foot building right on Nelson, we could just require a setback. You've got 3 acres, you can move it back. And I do think having setback negates some of the issues you get with height. So I guess looking at it from that perspective, I'm okay with it.
And along with what Pat was mentioning, if you look at the 2 maps on 22 and 23, we really have very little adjacency to single family residential existing buildings.
Yeah.
So that may make it a little bit more comfortable for you, or we create a little bit more setback to residential properties. If you wanted to have a little bit more, you're okay with the height, but you want a little bit more setback to those residential existing single family residential zoning districts, as an example. And you also have the option still of, if 60 feet is maybe a little bit too high, maybe you bring that down a little bit, but correspondingly, you also bring down the 45 feet that's currently allowed, so that the incentive isn't just from 45 to 50 or 55, that it's actually from 35 up to 55 or whatever you're comfortable with. So I think you do have some leeway in adjusting down the existing 45-foot building height in C2 if you so desire, to not maximize your incentive, but to perhaps make it worthwhile.
Is height, I guess, stuck on this, height is from the front entrance just to the tallest place
Mhm.
on the building, or so it matters if you're doing a flat roof versus a peaked roof?
Correct. The way it's written now, I'm going to paraphrase, it's at the front door at grade. What was a good example? The expansion building for the Williams School is going to be coming off, and it's set back a good bit, but it's going to be coming off of West Washington Street. There's going to be entrance at grade, but the backside is going to be a little bit lower. So we're going to measure from that front elevation where the main entrance is located at grade. So it's not like there's going to be a grand staircase going up a floor and then you're going to gain that on top of it.
That was
It's
the
at
issue.
grade, and
Okay.
you're going to have the main. And if the back happens to fall off, you're going to gain a little bit of extra height on the backside. And that's going to be expected in the area with
Mhm.
rolling topography. And then the second part of that, it is to the maximum part of the building. And we had somebody, was it Lee Merrill?
Yeah,
That was trying.
This,
And
this
that-
versus that.
Correct. So other places do, well, we have a maximum. So my feeling is if it's 60 feet and you want to put in a peaked roof, you put in a peaked roof.
Mhm.
We have a maximum and you work within that. If you lose a floor, that's not our fault. You wanted to do. So you can't, I don't think you can argue successfully that we are prohibiting peaked roofs. No, you chose to maximize the number of floors and decided on a flat roof. But other places do take that into account and they say a maximum number of livable floors or however you want, and then they'll allow you a little bit extra for the roof so that you can put in a peaked roof if that's desirable in your community.
So it's 60 feet to whatever the
E-line
floor is,
or-
and then, I mean, the other places where they would say, okay, 60 feet that's all 60 feet of livable space. And then you can go up beyond that with your.
Or 10 or
with-
15 feet, whatever you want to allow for a peaked roof.
Yeah.
But
that-
we also
that-
let them
yeah.
have belfries, cupolas, monuments and water towers if you want to store your bats up there.
Forgot
in
to
the
mention
belfry and the
that
cupola.
we do have some exemptions to that height. Yes.
I just want to say cupola a lot.
Arnie, what's the precedent or neighboring sort of cities that like lowering the maximum in C2? So as you had suggested, that's a possible option. Like, is it, would we be would Lexington be an outlier if we made it lower than 45 feet in commercial district, C2?
We will look neighboring folks and see what their typical suburban commercial district and what their maximum height is, and we can report that back to you next time. I also struggle to think of any 45-foot tall building in the C2, with the exception of what was the bank buildings regional training quarters for BB&T, which is on the corner of Walker and Nelson. That's
Yeah.
a 3-story building. But other than that, I can only think of really 1-story buildings that, like Schul's, may have a fairly high ceiling height inside and then some sort of fancy thing on the front to make it look even taller. But other than the bank building, there aren't many multi-stories. So I'm not sure we're losing a whole lot if we reduce that 45 feet. But we'll certainly look in surrounding and do a quick survey of those.
And the county, I think was 30, but you have it in here. I think it's
Oh, yeah.
35 feet, but then they made an exemption for hotels because there will be a hotel just the other side of the bridge. That will be, I think, 6 stories.
There will be, in the sense it's planned or that it's allowed.
It's approved. Well, it's been approved. I don't know if they're gonna, I
Wow.
assume they're still
Yeah.
gonna
They'll-
build it,
at
but I
some
don't
point.
know.
On hold, as I understand it. And I think they had a 45-foot height with 4 stories. And then they specifically for that one went up to 55 feet and 5 stories,
That's right.
provided the setbacks on the side or allow a certain amount. So they did, for that particular hotel, increase their height in their commercial district.
My instinct is not to limit what we have right now, just for this. That's
Yeah.
just my feeling. Like, let's leave that there for people if they want to do some redevelopment in the commercial area, for instance.
Okay, so that means if we leave it at 45, then is everybody comfortable with the 60?
I am for now. I mean, unless I'm not
I
dogmatic.
am, as long as we're hopefully under this strongly encouraging mixed use with residential. It's being strongly encouraged.
Yeah.
That's the benefit we're
So
getting.
not just an apartment building, but an apartment building on top of.
Mhm.
So if you had a bank that took up the whole first floor, then you could build up 60 feet, make the rest of it living quarters.
Yeah.
That's the idea, right?
Mhm.
So we're cool with that.
But
Are
could you,
all these uses allowed in C2? I mean, you have to get a conditional use permit for a church, but water tower, is that allowed? in C2? I mean,
as-
You have a church spire without a
That was
church.
added because of the water tower property.
Yeah.
Okay.
from the beginning of our discussion, all of the permitted uses and all of the conditional uses, so we only have to go and search for the ones that
Yeah.
aren't included necessarily or aren't included either conditionally or by right.
Yeah.
But I have not gone and checked to make sure that all of those are conditional or permitted, but that is a check that needs to be done.
For the I know we kind of touched on it for the single family residences. Is that something that we want to include in there? Because I know you said that, or you mentioned that. I mean, I don't know how many single family homes are going to fit in the size acreage that you have. It'd be probably pretty limited.
And this may or may not help. When we were going through the the zoning ordinance amendment in 2016, 2017, and we were going through our use matrix and trying to figure out what should be allowed for each zoning district by right, conditional or not at all. I think we were trying to reserve the commercial space for commercial uses and therefore weren't trying to encourage or even allow the multifamily and the single family. So you may want to consider just following that line of thought, not allowing single family residences in the C2 zoning district as part of a PUD, simply because they're going to eat up too much acreage. And I don't know
How would you even have mixed use if it was a single family house? Yeah,
live work.
I mean,
I don't know. And it's a good
Yeah,
point. Just why is it in there?
So I do sort of think of on like VDOT where you have 5 acres. Current weather burns 2.5 acres. So do you do like a weather burn development and then you have, I don't know, little neighborhood cafe and park next to it or?
So VDOT is the commercial upfront and potentially is the single family on the backside.
I hadn't thought that far through, but it's all on the one parcel.
Yeah.
would
You know,
like
just as
the
a
would like the
example.
cottage housing be considered single family?
Mhm.
So maybe we should leave it. I mean, maybe you could do some type of like,
Cottage housing is going to be that odd thing that is not a PUD and it's probably not going to be 3 acres. It's going to be sort of a mini PUD for just residential units for smaller ones so you can get more per acre. But that's and there's a couple other characteristics for them. But that's sort of the limitation. It's not really so much mixed and it's not.
I mean,
Or
could you
larger
have
parcel.
that though? Could you have something like that in a mixed use development?
I think, what are you saying, Nick, is basically allow single family houses, but they're going to be little ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, basically, in which case we don't have to worry about the height of them because if they're little ones,
Right.
so in other words, say, let's not strike single family house residents from this altogether.
Mhm.
But basically, if they're going to be in there, they're not going to be McMansions, they're going to be smaller homes to fit in with it. But that
Just to make efficient use of the space. Yeah, because it's not that much.
but we're not
space.
really envisioning single family houses for this sort of thing because like you said, they eat up so much space, but
And then if we have cottage housing, just as an example, as a separate, then maybe the 5 acre VDOT property becomes 3 acres for PUD and mixed use. And then there's another zoning district in the back for
Mhm.
the overlay or base district that is cottage housing. So it's just something to consider.
Yeah,
don't
I
think
thought
we're
the
gonna have
cottage,
answers.
we don't have cottage housing right now, but I thought the application of cottage housing was for a R1 that you could do this on the R1 as opposed to in a C2. So
We
is
don't,
that correct?
generally speaking, cottage housing, you can double the density of what's currently allowed in a single family residential zoning district. But you're building smaller and you're having some sort of public open space for the people that live there, community space, and the parking is over to the side. Those are the quick and dirty characteristics of a cottage housing development. But yes, it's in a single family zone district typically.
So it would be, let's say the VDOT would have a PUD, and on top of that PUD would have a cottage housing requirement, or is that 2 separate things?
Might be 2 separate things.
but you wouldn't need that because if you just put a bunch of little houses in your PUD, you don't have to have a separate.
Right.
What happens
single
if
family
you
house.
Yeah. So, yeah.
what if you have a PUD with not little houses? Then what are you gonna necessarily use to say these have to be smaller and you have to be more dense
What
and
if-
have to get more of them in?
What if we put a square footage? Could we put like a
Nice.
square footage in the it's like have like a separate set because this is building height. Maybe we could have building square footage or something like that to limit the single family.
Right. I just think the size of the area that we're talking about is gonna be the limit to that. I
think
don't think
that's
we have
right.
to specify that. I think just the location is
If
gonna,
it has to be mixed use to fall in this regulation between those two things.
yeah, it's gonna limit it. It's not gonna.
So we're okay with leaving the single family in as it is
I am, yeah.
at 45.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we've talked about, and we're getting a good bit
Well,
past.
hold on. At 45 feet though, do we, like, that might be how we can limit it though, because if you're building a 45-foot house, then it's gonna probably be a pretty big house. You're not gonna have a small.
I think that's true.
So then you
San
want,
Francisco style houses, but
Yeah. So maybe like maybe we can, I don't know if we need to do it tonight.
No.
I
but-
mean, 35 is for R1 and R2 without, you can get up to 45 with additional setbacks.
How tall is a normal cottage house? Do you know?
Typically, they're limited to a story and a half.
Which would be like 15
So-
feet.
Yeah, I would say 20 feet.
All right, well, let's change it to 20 feet. For the.
Here's
for-
another thing to consider. Sorry for we keep considering a lot, but Blake mentioned a more urban setting. So a townhouse or a row house is a single family house.
That's true.
They just happen to be attached. So if you think of brownstones,
Yeah.
how many stories are those? 3, 4 sometimes? Is that necessarily something that you would want to prohibit if you're going down to 20?
No, that's
I-
true. I think that's a good point. I think that, yeah, maybe we can just leave it at 45. I mean, if you do, it's just, I think under that circumstance, it's fine. It's just, I think it's fine. I think that makes sense. I think we can just leave it as is.
Well, we can certainly come back to it if we have sort of an epiphany between now and the next meeting that
The only thought I would have is maybe have some type of square footage like thing to kind of be a check on it. Would be the only
Well,
caveat.
yeah, well, again, we go back to the very beginning of character development, mixture of uses, use types, mixture of housing types and affordability. So like where the assumption is this PUD would have high density housing, multifamily housing, but also mixed types of housing. So maybe there's a single family. That's what that's sort of just building that in. So 45 feet, again, we could change everything, but I don't feel like we need to change every number just because we need to put a unique stamp on our plan. Like
Mhm.
there's some very standard numbers that I think we can agree with.
How about one last item?
All right, we're going to talk about all the parking now or?
No. In D, it just says conditional use permits are required for structures exceeding the maximums. Do we want to allow any maximum height, additional height above the maximums that we just talked about, but haven't agreed to and haven't put in stone yet?
Yeah, no, I can't imagine. And that's an interesting thought too. Okay, so they would have to rezone this parcel to planned unit development mixed use. So why do you even have a conditional use permit? I mean, the whole thing is basically a conditional use permit, isn't it? To do the rezoning, unless it's in the future, you already have it zoned and I don't know why you would,
But like
yeah,
we have
why
in a
would you
couple of
need
other
that?
instances, C1 zoning district maximum 45 feet in the height, except for if it's a government building and there's a conditional use permit up to. So it's sort of a
Okay, yeah.
ceiling, but do you want to raise it for special reasons? And how do you do that through the conditional use permit?
Okay,
But we're
yeah,
already
right.
talking, I think, some fairly decent heights
Yeah.
for our locality. So it's just a question or just if you want to consider striking that or not allowing additional heights, or if you put conditional use permits up maximum heights listed, but no more than we'll say 100 feet just for fun. Just to put something on there so that somebody can't ask for 200 feet or something totally ridiculous.
they'd have to make a very strong case for the conditional use permit, I think. And we were allowed to say no and say, you know what, that's ridiculous. That's not going to work here. That's
Yeah,
what makes it
Leave it in
conditional.
and just
right.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt.
listen to it as a conditional use permit when it comes in. Okay.
Because yeah, you never know what idea could come in that we maybe would really like.
And so far, we've been fairly flexible with that concept of let's see it come in
Mhm.
and not regulate it too much. And then if we like it, then we can approve it.
Mhm.
And they'll see this, the requirements, like the 60 feet requirements already. So like they probably would know they'd have to make a pretty strong case for us to, like, there's a reason why we put it in there. So.
And as a planner, this is the kind of guidance saying, okay, well, if you want to go above this, then you're going to have to do this. That would be useful for you to have that, to give the person alternatives.
And then I can automatically give them the CUP application and your considerational criteria are right in there. And well, you've got to meet those things before it can really be considered and approved.
All right, I think we should allow public comment.
Oh, yeah.
Do we have anybody that would like to speak up about this item of new business? No, all right, let's move on to, we'll close the new business and discuss other business. Zoning and planning report.
Just quickly, the WNL Campus Master Plan update applications were advertised for the June 16th, 2022 City Council public hearings. And the meeting packet and agendas will be posted tomorrow. We spent some time finalizing the report this afternoon and handed that over to the city clerk. And those will be posted probably tomorrow, maybe in the afternoon. I attended along with Jim Hallis, a housing listening session with the CSPDC. They're in the first part of a regional housing study, and they had promised us to sort of focus on Rockbridge County, BV, and Lexington first. And they had a couple of consultants that they have brought along or onto their team for this particular housing study. And we just, along with Rockbridge County and BV, had a couple of folks in this room, just sort of letting them know what we thought our housing issues were. So that's just, again, the beginning of that housing study. Just quickly, code enforcement, there was an AC unit that was installed in the exterior sidewall of the structure. I think it's at 25 West Washington Street without a mechanical permit and without ARB approval. Anything that can be seen in the historic district downtown has to go to ARB for approval, and they are going to have to screen that particular unit, which is going to be a little bit interesting since it's up on the wall. And I'm not sure what that screening is going to look like, but that is a requirement.
Does the ARB have to even approve the screening though?
Which building was that? Sorry.
I believe it's 25 West Washington Street, Walker Program
Oh,
building.
yeah, right.
A unit was put into the side and probably should have gone on the roof. And the reason it was problematic, not just because of the way it looks, it's pretty far back in that little alleyway. There's a little 3-foot wide, narrow little alley that goes through on the left-hand side of 25 West Washington. But it's more problematic for fire because that's the only egress for the 3 apartments in the back. So if the fire marshal has to send the firefighters over there to fight a fire and the AC unit happens to catch on fire, that just blocks that only egress. So that was the bigger issue than necessarily those units sticking out of the wall a fair distance back from the sidewalk. We did find the other day another unregistered short-term rental. It was discovered as an advertisement on Facebook and is also located on Airbnb. And I have not yet, and that's at 414 Carruthers, not yet been able to make contact with the owner. That's all I have for a zoning report.
Great, thank you. Item B, catalyst project updates if applicable.
The only thing they mentioned about the bike ped plan, we have not quite posted that. That will get posted shortly to the city's website. You have to make one final review to make sure that the minor comments that I recall from city council are included in there. And once we do that, we'll post it.
Great. Key annual planning commission milestones. Anything we want to discuss there before moving on? No? All right. Leslie, do you have a city council report?
Sure. City Council met on Thursday, June 2nd, and prior to the regular meeting, a work session was held with Washington and Lee regarding the master plan. And as Arnie said, the public hearing for Washington and Lee master plan will be held on June 16th, so our next meeting. At the regular meeting, a public hearing was held to receive comments relative to a purchase agreement for the sale of the Spotswood property. And 2 presenters spoke in person with concerns regarding traffic, the need for traffic lights, keeping the height of the building in sync with the neighborhood, not developing the property, and not using it as a cemetery and using it as a cemetery. Another commenter noted by phone to council that the deposit was too small and should be non-refundable. No action was taken by council, and the public hearing will continue at our next meeting, which is June 16th. A public hearing was held to receive public comment on the 4 applicants for 2 school board terms from July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2025, and council will likely vote on the appointments at our June 16th meeting. That's all I have unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Leslie. Any other things before we move to item number 8? All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right,
Oh, nice.
got the gavel in.
Nice.
Still hot mic though.
Go. Thank you all.
Oh, Suzanne.
She's young. She's bouncing.